Okay, so thank you for joining us today for the session that we're going to have about Kubernetes, multi-tenancy using virtual cluster that is going to be led by Ian Kiprotich. I hope you guys are excited, and I'll be your host for today. So my name is Samuel Kadima, and I'm the founder of the Nairobi DevOps community. I'm also a DevOps technical mentor at Moringa School. So we have a quote of the day here. So when you know what you want, you are much more likely to get it. So it's easier for you to focus on something when you know what you're focusing on. And it's impossible for you to focus on what you don't know. So if you know your destination, it's easier for you to navigate to that destination since you know where you're expected to be. So you can follow the specific path and you can be able to get where you're targeting to get. So on our agenda today, for this part of the agenda, we are going to have an icebreaker. Then I'm going to share with you the meeting expectations. And then you're going to learn about the community if you're new to this community. And then I can have maybe one or two questions as our speaker joins. So for the icebreaker, you can reply on the chat, but I can also get some people, maybe two people, who can respond, who can unmute and speak. You can just raise your hand and speak. I'll give you the opportunity. So if you woke up one day and there was no one else in the world, what would you do? So you can respond on the chat. And also I can get to hear from anyone who would like to speak. If you woke up any day, one day and there was no one else in the world, what would you do? Any volunteers who would like to speak? So Patrick says, atapiga sherehe. So those who don't understand what sherehe is partying. So Possum. Yes, Possum. Okay, Kate.
Hi everyone. So if I woke up one day and I was alone, I
Yeah.
would I would farm because I have to eat food. So I would start farming first and have like something that I'd get food from. After that, I'd start thinking of other things like
Okay.
researching and all. But I'm saying that because I'm used to gaming and also yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Where will you be researching? Oh, let's just assume everything is there.
Okay, I would. If I was the only person, I would start. If I start farming and then I get food, I lose
Mm,
the information I have,
mm.
and then probably for the research part, if there's no what else, I do the research myself.
Okay, good. So Eric says, figure out where to get food and power. And then Andrew says, nitaenda US bila visa. So that means you would go to United States without a visa. Elizabeth, Jerry.
Yes. So if I woke up and I was the only one, first I would go through a range of emotions because I am built to be social. So the first thing maybe I would do is to research why am I the only one? What happened?
Okay, interesting. So we also have here David says, check if the internet is still working. That is very important. Yeah, so I think those are the ones who have responded. So we can move on. So some of the meeting expectations. that we have is that you should be able to mute yourself when you are not speaking. You should raise your hand if you want to speak, and you should use the chat box to write your comments and questions during the session, and then be respectful as we go on. So, and be curious, ask questions, and feel free to ask the questions. Do not fear anything. So about this community, so Nairobi DevOps community is just a community of DevOps enthusiasts composed of both people who are new to DevOps and experts. The mission for the community is to create a supportive and inclusive community that values diversity and supports learning and growth. And the vision is to be a leading DevOps community in Nairobi and beyond, driving innovation and empowering professionals to excel in their careers. So here is the team that we have at the community that ensures that everything is organized and you're able to have the events that we normally have. So Samuel Kadima, who is the founder. We have Mamun, who is the assistant director. We have Marceline Mochama, who is the community outreach manager. We have Samson Kalume, who is the programs lead. Ian, who is presenting today, is also the treasurer and also the assistant community outreach manager. We have Alvin Dungu, who is the projects lead. We have Emma Gachoki, who handles our events and social media management. We have Lawrence Juma, who is the assistant to Emma. Then we have Franklin Odd, who is the administrator. Ivy Chepto, who is the creative manager. Daniel Orega, who is the assistant to Ivy. And then Ivan Nguyo, who is the assistant project manager. So let me just admit these people and then we continue. So in case you want to help us in the community, one of the things you can do is help us in running workshops and sessions that we have. So you can reach out in case you have a topic that you like to talk about, and we'll be glad to give you that opportunity. So you can connect us with other DevOps professionals as well that can add value to the community. You can give us feedback and share ideas on how we can make the community better. You can also share our posts when we post them on different channels, and you can help us in documenting activities. So if you're a photographer, videographer, or even somebody who can take minutes for us, I would greatly appreciate such things, such people, such skills. They will be helpful for the organization. So the other thing is organizing events. So the events that we plan. So if you think maybe you can chip in and help us, we'll be great. We'll be very grateful. So today the speaker is Ian Kiprotich, and he's going to talk to us about multi-tenancy in Kubernetes using virtual clusters. So Ian is a DevOps engineer who's experienced, and I will invite him. And as he sets up, I'd like to take maybe a question or two during the transition. So in case there is any question about the community, I would like to answer that as Ian sets up. So welcome, Ian. And if you have a question, you can just raise your hand. Anyone? So is there anyone with a question? So another thing that I forgot to say here, we are, in case you are not from our community channel, so you can scan any of these codes and you'll be able to join the community. So is there any question? Any question from anyone about the community? Okay, good. So Ian, you can take over. So I'll stop sharing. Ian, can you hear me?
Hello, Sam.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
Very fine.
Yeah, I can hear you. You had a question. If I don't know if everyone wake up, everyone is dead. What will you do? What will you do as Sam?
I will have the entire land, so it's just to become. I will become landlord.
Landlord for
Yeah,
who?
for anyone who would come across in case they happen to come across.
uh, anyway,
Yeah.
that's fine. Thank you guys for joining us today for our session about multi-tenancy in Kubernetes. Basically, we'll be talking about virtual clusters. I know there is another tool, capsule, which you can use. These other things you can also do in terms of multi-tenancy. But the focus for today will be basically on virtual clusters. So, as Sam has introduced me, I'm a technical writer also, apart from being a DevOps engineer. So most of the things I do, I think I learn about Kubernetes every day. So I break things, and make things and try things here and there. Basically, that's me. Uh, yeah. So, the agenda for today, we first discuss what is multi-cluster, then multi-tenancy, then we'll compare between the namespace multi-tenancy and what vCluster offers. And finally, I'll show you a small demo uh, on vCluster and something to do with Loft. Yeah, just to mention that Loft, the Loft Labs.sh, they are the pioneers of this project known as vCluster. It has been used by a couple of companies. Example is Adobe, uh, Codefresh, and just to name a few. And yeah, the thing about today, I just want to share this to the community. So if you're out there, you've never tried something to do with multi-tenancy, or you're having some challenges to do with Kubernetes, I think today you learn one or two things, and you'll use it to better yourself. So before we dive deep into vCluster, the first thing we should talk about is multi-cluster. So from the name itself, it's about multiple clusters whereby you're giving each tenant their own cluster, to a dedicated cluster to work with. Uh, just to mention, a tenant can be any person. It can be a team. It can be an organization. It can also be yourself. You're just giving yourself another cluster to try out things. A tenant is anyone. Most of us are tenants in the places where we stay. So yeah. So multi-cluster, for example, you can have a cluster in EKS, another cluster in Azure, or 2, 3 clusters in EKS. Uh, multi-clusters have a lot of advantage that it brings to the table. For example, each tenant, you're going to give them a full cluster to handle. Each tenant, you're going to give them their own CRDs. They can play with their own versions, because uh, the field of Kubernetes, these versions always change day in, day out, and you can be using 2 different versions of, let's say, SAT manager, which it can cause some conflict. So we know that CRDs, it's always a pain. So with multi-cluster, there's a strong isolation. Everyone can have their own CRD. You have your own API. It brings enhanced security, and everyone is just fine with what they have. But then it has some disadvantages. For example, if you're giving everyone a cluster in your company, let's say, and you're having like 10 projects, so and each project has to run on its own, cluster. So this causes a lot of resource inefficiency, because each team, each application has to have its own resources. It might be using too much, it might be underutilizing the resources. There can be challenges with multi-cluster. Another thing is if you're giving every tenant their own cluster, you have to manage that cluster. There's things to do with monitoring, things to do with networking. A lot of things has to be done onto the cluster. And finally, if you're running this on a cloud environment, this might be very, very costly because you're having different clusters, different, in, let's say, different zones. It can lead to a very high cost. I'm sorry for that. The slides are running away. Any question up to there? Let's keep this engagement as entertaining so that you can have a discussion rather than me talking by myself. So anyone just say something up kwa chat, just unmute, then say something and then continue. Hello, Sam, are you with me?
Hello. There is nothing on the chat.
Fine. If someone was raised the hand.
Yeah, Gilbert.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I don't want to confirm, like, is it multiple organization using a single cluster?
When we are talking about multi tenancy or multi cluster, what are you asking specifically?
So multi-tenancy.
Oh, so I was starting on multi-tenancy right now. So multi-tenancy, it can be let's say different tenants or even different applications running on the same infrastructure. Even different organizations, because you can there are organizations out here which sells their infrastructure and they give out virtual clusters to other organizations for them to run their applications on the infrastructure, on their own infrastructure. For example, is the CodeFresh. They have a very good thing to do with multi-tenancy and vCluster with their GrowCD, whereby a tenant or customer requests a cluster and they're just being provisioned via the vCluster. Is that fine, Gilbert?
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, I'm good. So that's basically about multi-tenant, just having one cluster and everyone is having their access to that cluster in different ways. So first of all, there's the namespace multi-tenancy, whereby you're running. From the diagram here, you can see that different tenants are using the same Kube API, but they have been allocated to each their own namespace. Each and everyone, each of them, they have their own namespace to deploy the application. I think most of the projects I've worked with, we have been doing that. You're just given your own namespace with some RBAC rules on it, and you're constrained to that namespace. It's a good thing, yes, but there's some conflicts when you talk about namespace multi-tenancy. First, its advantage compared to the multi-cluster. So in namespace multi-tenancy, there's resource efficiency. Since each tenant is given their own namespace to manage, the resources you still be using that one cluster. You are deploying your application on a given namespace that you have the RBAC. Then at the end of the day, the resources you're using becomes less. The operation becomes very simple because it's just one cluster. The cost of the cluster running, it becomes less because just same thing, one cluster. There's resource isolation, a little bit of resource isolation here and there with namespace. But with namespace, there's some disadvantage. For example, namespace provides the logical isolation, but it may not offer the same level of security that you're expecting from running your own cluster in your own fully cluster. So namespace isolation also it's complex. You require a lot of RBAC policies to be done onto the cluster. Uh, and resource quota configurations. You have to ensure that every tenant you're having who is accessing to that namespace, you have to make sure that whatever they're doing is what is required, because you don't want them to go to your neighbor or the application running the next namespace and make some noise, which namespace multi-cluster can cause such. Another disadvantage is the security concerns. For example, if one namespace is compromised, it can impact the whole cluster, and someone can break through from one container, running in one namespace and infect your whole cluster. And then now I'll talk about the V cluster, which it is the main topic for the day. I think up to there, if you have a question, just feel free before we talk about the V cluster and I show you the demo of the V cluster.
There's no question. Hello, Ian.
Nice. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Can hear you.
Nice. Okay, fine. So virtual clusters, as I stated from the parent company is Loft Labs. It has been on the market for I think 3.5 years. It has been used in production, and it's an open source project since on the month of October. So virtual cluster or vCluster is a very innovative way to manage multi-tenancy with a very strong isolation while using that single Kubernetes cluster than having multiple cluster, which we talked about the expenses of running them. So the features of vCluster, first of all, there's the logical isolation. For example, each vCluster has its own kube API, meaning you can do anything with the cluster that you'll be doing on your full cluster. So you can do it on your vCluster. Each and every tenant thinks that this is my own cluster, and no one is looking at what I'm doing. But in real sense, the cluster is running inside the main cluster. Example is you can compare the V cluster as the virtual machines. As the virtual machines run inside the machines, the V cluster also run inside the cluster. So it offers also a lot of resource efficiencies. It offers isolation at all levels. We've talked about each cluster having its own kube API, so you can communicate direct to the cluster. This is a comparison between separate namespaces, separate cluster and V cluster. So isolation, it's very weak at namespace, but strong on V cluster and separate cluster. And you can see in the middle part here that vCluster actually brings the both worlds together and gives you a better multi-tenant environment compared to if you are going for the separate namespace or separate cluster. And I think this is something that you should give a look into. So at its architecture, this is what happens, and I'll be doing the demo so that you can see as it happens. First of all, we have this is the host namespace here, and host cluster. And in the host cluster, we have the host namespace that is running there. So when you create a virtual cluster, it is deployed as a namespace. in your main cluster. So there are two pods which are being deployed: the core DNS and the cluster itself, the Kube API, so that you can communicate with it. And we'll be seeing it in a minute. When we are deploying applications in the V cluster, what happens is the pods are being deployed on the underlying cluster, but the upper resources, let's talk about the deployment, or we talk about the deployment or stateful sets. They're not being deployed on, it's just a virtual thing that you can see on your end, but the main thing, the pods are running on the host cluster. So the use cases for vCluster where I've seen people being using it for, you can use it for multi-tenancy because it offers a lot of I'm sorry for this slide. Because it offers isolation, you can use it to test different clusters. One thing about vCluster is you might be running on your main cluster, you might be running version 1.2 point something, 0.8, and you want to test a new version. Let's say 1.2.9, 1.29 or 1. Yeah. You want to test the new cluster. You can just use the vCluster to test the new version of Kubernetes in a vCluster. So this means that if you're having these all over CRDs running everywhere, you can easily integrate them together and look for a combination that works for you best. Another use case is for dev environments. When you're using vCluster, it's easier to create dev environments whereby you can test new features very fast by a pull request. So each pull request comes out with its own cluster. Everything runs it very well there. So you can give the full test there. And another thing about vCluster, another use case is because it's being used at cost control. You've seen how it can cut cost from having multiple clusters to just having one single cluster. So up to there, I think I've talked about the vCluster. Anyone with a question about the vCluster before I do the demo?
So I have a question, Ian.
Yes.
So about the vCluster. So you said it uses namespaces for each cluster.
Yes.
So what would how is that why wouldn't someone just maybe on their cluster, normal cluster, use namespaces for different projects on the same cluster, for different maybe things that they're doing on the same cluster, and prefer to use different use now vClusters?
Sam, I've talked about something previously, but let me just repeat it. Namespace offers a great isolation, but the thing with namespace is there's no when you're integrating different CRDs and different versions of things. Let's say your first application, you're running it, and when you're configuring it, you're being using a certain version, and another team using another version of the same chart. So it becomes a conflict when you're trying to integrate them. That is one of the challenges. Another challenge of using just a namespace is it does not offer a full let's say a full isolation to give to the application. What I mean by this is when you're running an application on a namespace, it's easier to let's say someone to break through from it, or if it has not been configured well using the RBAC rules, it can be a challenge.
Okay, understood. So there is Shadrach here as well, who has a question.
Hi. So one of the major challenges that I always have is to do with storage. So when you're dealing with the the multi-tenancy, how do you handle storage? Is it shared? And in the cases where you have a stateful set where you have, let's say, an attachment to a particular node in that case, what happens there?
When running with multi-tenancy, and let me talk about the V cluster more than the namespace one. The resources are being shared. If you're running on the stateful set, I think the resources are being synced to the main cluster. So from the main cluster itself, there is when the resources are being shared equally. But the nodes are running on the main cluster.
Are you satisfied? The person who had asked the question?
So basically, so in that case, the attachment of you're actually sharing you're also sharing the storage across the clusters.
Yeah, true.
Okay.
I think when I'll be doing the demo here, I think we'll get to see how the storage is being shared from each and every cluster. Is that fine?
Okay, that's all right.
Fine. So to get started with vCluster, you can check their website at vcluster.com. You download the binary. Here's the link to download the binary. I think for me, I already have the binary starting, and all you have to do is just create the vcluster, create the cluster you want to create. So let's do that. Let me first show you all the namespaces that are running in my cluster. At the moment, these are my namespaces. So I have two vClusters already running, but one is in terminating mode, and then the other one is in active mode. So when you install the vCluster CLI, all you have to do is run the vCluster, create, let's say, in C. So when you run the vCluster create team, whatever you're creating or the name you're giving to your vCluster, a Helm chart will be deployed. Our vCluster uses Helm chart. A Helm chart here will be deployed, containing everything that the cluster actually needs. So as it's installing, you can just check here at. So this is what I'm using here. This is Lens. If you're not familiar with Lens, you can check it out. It's a UI for Kubernetes. Just check on it. So here you can see that two pods were deployed, the cluster itself and the core DNS. I hope from your side you're seeing everything. Hello, Sam.
Yes, we are seeing.
Thank you. So the cluster is already deployed and it has been put forward. So we can just check it. The first thing I'll check is the namespaces. So here you can see that I'm only having the main namespace running, but on our main cluster, we were having around all these namespaces were running. So let me connect to the vCluster itself and deploy something there. This here is the access to my vCluster. You can see first thing that the node here, this is a virtual node, or you can you have an option to change it, give it your own, let's say declare it, or they change the Helm values and give it a static node and give it limits to it. So let's one thing about using Lens, you can easily create something. So let's create an Nginx deployment. So I'm creating this Nginx deployment on the vCluster itself, and we will see what happens when we look at the deployments and the pods on the actual cluster. So the Nginx has been deployed. So I deployed 3 pods. And here we are deployment. So when you go back to the host cluster and we check the pods running on the Tenancy vCluster, we are seeing that we are having the Nginx deployment pod running, also the core DNS and the cluster itself running on the main cluster. So the pods are the only resources which are being synced. If we check at the deployments here, we have nothing running. If we check the deployments, there's nothing running. But if we check the pods, we have the pods are being synced from the virtual cluster to the main cluster. So there's a lot of things you can do with vCluster. You can, when you provision vCluster, you're given your own Kube API. So here you can, let's say you can install anything. You can try installing a Helm chart. You can install any Helm chart that you want to install. You can do anything. Try out different versions of different things that you want to do. So I think I've answered the question when someone asked me about the where the storage is being positioned.
Did the person get the answer? Okay, so Albert. Yes, Albert. Albert, you can unmute and speak.
Hey guys.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so basically, okay, do you have an application that you can deploy and we at least see it on the machine? On the vCluster, that is.
I have deployed an Nginx.
I mean, can we see it on the machine? Like,
Oh, I port forward it.
yeah, you port forward it.
Fine.
As you do that, Ian, I think I have a follow-up question on the storage.
Okay.
I'm not sure I understood or I missed it. So since volumes are namespaced, and you are saying the vCluster will create for you a namespace, and it's a shared cluster. So if volumes are not namespaced, so how are we going to share a volume? Or is it something, maybe, are you talking in the terms of within an organization, sharing within an organization, or something that different people are sharing and maybe they have access to the same volume?
I think this is within an organization.
Okay.
Okay.
You can be talking so that we don't think
Oh,
you're on mute. Yeah.
what do you think about the V cluster?
The V cluster, I think it's a cool concept. Yeah, it's worth trying.
One of the use cases I've seen of V cluster is, for example, when we are having a hackathon, and people are trying to do different things on different clusters. You can let me create a service. When you're having what's it called?
Sorry?
When you're having a hackathon, and
Okay.
you want different people to have their own clusters and try out different things. VCluster is a thing we should be looking at.
Okay.
Another question?
So in case you have a question, you just raise your hand and I'll give you the chance. So, Mark Muridi. So you can just keep your hand up so that I find you and give you a chance. I made people viewers today so that we don't go back to the problem we had last time. So Mark, you can speak.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Thank you, Ian. We are loving the session so far. Very informative. Now, my question is, you've talked about Lens. It seems like Lens is a management tool for local production. How about when you're dealing with I mean for local development? What about if you're dealing with deployment for production on AWS servers and the like? How will you use the graphical user interface, or all this will be done using commands? I'm just trying to understand.
Actually, Lens can be used at production level. It is a product from Mirantis. It has a licensed version. All what happens here at Lens is you can import your clusters. You can just import the kubeconfig of your cluster depending on where it's running. So if you download the kubeconfig, you can just import it, or you can copy and paste the kubeconfig. So if the resources are running on AWS, you can just import the kubeconfig. Actually, I'm running my cluster is not even locally. This is a Scaleway console.
Okay, thank you.
Or you can give a try on can give a try. Rancher.
So in your service configuration, does it put let's say a load balancer by default, or how does it get accessed on the browser?
That's what I'm trying to do actually.
I didn't see the type of the service there. That's why I was asking in the service file. So you can put there a type, yeah, under the spec. Should be on the same level as the selector. Yes, Shadrach. Just a second. Yes, you can talk. Shadrach?
So looking at scaling, so one, how would you manage the cluster so that, because I can imagine, okay, one of the use cases that I can think of is, let's say I want to create an app, let's say a platform where I want to be able to deploy for different clients. And one of the things that, let's say, I would want to have an overview of, because I can see you have the V cluster, and then you have, or rather you have the different clusters, but you have the main cluster. So how can I be able to look at the resource utilization from a management point of view on the main cluster, to be able to know this cluster is consuming this much in terms of resource, and then also now be able to determine how I can be able to scale the different clusters differently, because I could have a customer who, say for example, is a heavy utilizer of resources, the other one is not, and I would want to be able to balance that out. So how do you go about that?
I think the easiest way is you monitor from the main cluster. For example, here I was running Prometheus and Grafana. So when you monitor from the main cluster, and you can see each namespace, the amount of load that they are using, the space they are using, everything you can see from whatever monitoring tool you are, because we're just monitoring the, what's it called? You're monitoring the namespace only.
And if you enable the auto scaling, is it auto scaling per cluster, or will it be on the main cluster? How would auto scaling work here?
It will be on. You cannot. Okay, it can. It will be on the virtual cluster. Because what you'll be doing, you'll be scaling. You know, you already have your Cube API as the cluster, as a virtual cluster. So using that with the CRDs, you can also be scaling the virtual cluster itself. Also, Loft Labs, they offer Helm charts for they offer the Helm chart for Grafana. So you can just check the Helm charts. It's already configured. There was a question which I was asked, and I was trying to answer it before.
Is it about?
Yeah, so here is the Helm chart for Grafana dashboard from Loft. So if you deploy this Helm chart, you can easily check out the resource utilization and everything that goes in it. And with that, we'll be talking about. I'll be showing you the Loft. So Loft Labs, this is and I'm installing the Loft on the V cluster itself. So I've talked about the V cluster. So the commercial offering of V cluster is Loft Labs. So they give you a good UI where you can use to manage these V clusters in a very, very easy way. Create templates. When you're deploying the V cluster, there are those resources that when you're deploying the cluster, you want it to be deployed with. For example, if you want to deploy a cluster and Argo CD running in it, so it's easier with using the templates to deploy a virtual cluster declaring all the things that you want it to be running in. So all you have to do is Loft start. So you can download the binary for Loft, check it out, and then install it. You can just run the Loft start. It deploys an what's it called in a namespace, and it is also exposed outside. It has a graphical user interface. You'll just be seeing it in a minute.
I have another question, Ian.
Okay.
So with this V cluster, I do not need to set up any other cluster. I can just have V cluster and I'm good to go.
What you can do is you can have your EKS running somewhere, or you can. I don't know why this is not forwarding, but what you can do,
Yes.
you can have your main cluster. That can be physical cluster or running in the cloud. You can run the V cluster in it, and then having different clusters, even 30, 40, 50 clusters that you can just be using and dumping it, ephemeral environments. You can test stuff and dump it later. Or you can use it for running your application.
Okay. Thank you. Joy has a question. Yes, Joy.
Hi, I think I'm a bit new to this, but I'm a bit lost somewhere. Not very lost, but you keep on mentioning the word QBPI, and I'm here wondering what it means. I've tried to Google and I can't seem to find any answer.
Yes, Ian. Ian. Are you speaking, Ian? We can't hear you. Hello. I think there is an issue with your audio.
Hello, Sam.
Yes, yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I had the question. So QBPI, it is what we use to communicate with the cluster itself. For example, if you are running let's say if you want to use the CLI to talk to your cluster, if you want to use the, like what I was using here, the lens, if you want to use it to talk to your cluster, that's what you'll be using.
So like, is it like an application or what is it exactly?
Sam, can you just assist me on that as I try to log in here?
So I don't know much about it, so I don't think I'm in a good position to respond to it. It's Cube API. So I think Gilbert, let me see if I'll get the answer.
Fine. Anyone else can give a try.
So Gilbert has a question. Go ahead, Gilbert. It's Cube API. Oh, you mean Cube API like for Kubernetes? Is that what you meant? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a Kubernetes server or
Yeah, server.
a Kubernetes API server.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't know that is what you meant. So the Kubernetes API server is the entry point to your Kubernetes cluster. So you make it's what you're going to interact with. It accepts HTTP requests. So you normally say you interact with your cluster through the terminal. You're going to use kubectl to say something like kubectl get pods or kubectl apply to create some resources on Kubernetes. So the Kube API server is the one that you're going to communicate with. It's like it's the brain of in the master node. It's found in the master node or in the master, what is it called? API server. Yeah, only in the control plane. It's found in the control plane of Kubernetes. So the control plane is like the brain of that cluster. So the Kube API will just take instructions that you give it, and then it's going to the other Kubernetes components that are found in the master node, such as the HCD, the Kube controller. So it is going to work with those and communicate with their nodes to ensure that if it's resources that you need to set up, you're able to set up those nodes, those resources. Does that make sense, Joy?
Yes, thanks. I think I was lost earlier because I thought he meant Cube API, but now that you've mentioned Cube API, now it makes a lot of sense. I thought it was like a different word, so I couldn't find it on any browser.
Oh, okay. It's Cube API server. I think I'm forgetting the name as well. So let me just confirm.
It's Cube. It's called the API server. I'm very sorry, maybe my pronunciation. It's
Okay.
So I've logged in. Are you contented first of all?
Yeah. Thank you.
Fine. So I've logged into the Loft UI. From here, you can create templates. You can define what you want your cluster to have. You can define like, let's say you want your cluster to deploy different things. Let's say you want it to be deployed directly with Prometheus. You want, let's say, you want something to do with Argo CD. So this is the YAML that will be deployed. So you have very easy. You can easily use it to change anything or add something in it. So you can easily let me say this is you can create users. You can add a user. You can create different passwords. You can use the RBAC rules here. You can also create what can they do in that cluster. How do you want them? How do you want to give them access to your cluster? All of these these are just settings that you can use to manage the vCluster. One thing you should know is that Loft, this UI or the Loft thing itself is an enterprise version, so it has limited features if you're using it on the free version. But as an organization, if you want to manage different workloads using vCluster, you can go for the Loft enterprise version. And also on that note, yesterday, vCluster also released their Pro Edition, which also has UI, which is similar to this, but it also has an enterprise version of it. It has been released, I think, I've said yesterday, and go check it on it also. So you can add users, you can create teams, you can do some management of the teams, you can declare what can they do, what can the cluster admin do. Also, what you can do on this instance, you can connect another cluster. So you can remember that I had my first cluster, so this is my virtual cluster. So you can connect another cluster here. Let's say if you have 5 different clusters, you can put them together, and Loft can manage all of them easily, creating virtual cluster in each and every of those clusters. So as a management point of view, on the Loft side of it, you can use it to manage these other clusters, creating ephemeral environments and giving out to your tenants, giving them a chance to try on one or two things on the cluster. So you can create some access on it. And one thing you've noticed about the UI, there's a question.
So Joseph is asking if we have audio. So I think he can't hear you. So Joseph, probably you have network issues. Can you guys hear?
If you can hear, just throw a thumbs up.
Or a plus one on the
we can
chat.
hear. We can hear.
Okay. Good. So you can continue. Ian.
Yeah, you can also give roles to your clusters. Let me create this cluster using this template. Just the Loft has also a CLI, so you must have this Loft CLI so that you can use the Loft CLI to create these virtual clusters. Yeah, and I think that brings me to the end of our discussion today. With Loft, check it out. With vCluster, also check it out. For the one who was asking a question on as a management point of view, how do you set up the cluster-wide monitoring? There are things here you can do. You can use the quotas or some stuff here. You can also create templates on it. Yeah. So at that point, I'll be ending my talk for today. Give it a try, play around with it, and that's it. So if you have any question, please ask.
Any questions from anyone? Or comments? Any questions or comments? Feel free to ask any question if you have any, or if you have any comment as well. You're welcome to ask. So for those who are not in our community, you can scan the QR code to join our community and scan any of them. So thank you so much, Ian, for the presentation, and thank you all for being patient and for your questions and participation. So if there is no other question, yeah, so I wish you guys a good week ahead. We are going to have another session on Sunday. So we'll be sharing those details tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you on Sunday at 8 p.m. Have a good week, end of the week.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Ian. Very informative. Just wanted to add that we've learned a lot, and have a good night. See you guys on Sunday.
See you. You're all welcome.